When I was a young GP, I remember meeting this little girl who was around 4 years old at the time. Kind of a little bit crazy to think that she would now be in her 30s. Anyway, when I met her, she was about 4 years old, and I remember saying to her in my most friendly, child welcoming voice, "Hello, my name's Caroline. I'm a doctor." And I remember she said to me quite gleefully, she said, "Oh, I'm adopted too." And it was a really kind of a special moment, that connection, even though I felt like a bit of a fraud because I allowed her to think that I was adopted. But she was so delighted to find someone similar to her. I remember thinking in that moment how smart and brave her parents were just by allowing her to grow up with that knowledge. And because there were so many stories about disclosure of adoption and how that information doesn't go down well if you disclose that to a teenager or a young adult, or if it's poorly executed or unplanned even. So that example was a really lovely and delightful one. But that is just one of the traumas that adoptees can face within that family situation, which should be a really precious sanctuary, but is not always. So adoptees are susceptible to many traumas. First of all, there's that initial abandonment loss of leaving the birth mother, maybe time in special care nurseries or adoption agencies or orphanages. There's the daily micro-traumas of difference from family members, like maybe skin colour or hair type or body size or shape, or all of those little things that tell an adopted child that they don't fit in, that they're not the same, that they're different, that they're an outsider. So they may also have siblings, either also adopted with their own trauma, or siblings who are born to the adopted parents, maybe showing a different attachment to those parents. So these little things are all traumas. Parents may have had a difficult journey up to the adoption. They may have struggled with IVF and infertility. Maybe the journey to adopt a child, perhaps from overseas, was a long and difficult one. So extended family expectations and maybe discrimination or othering from extended family due to their infertility or their adoption or their choice to adopt a child. So maybe even just the timing, like adoption takes years, and sometimes after the infertility journey, having that new arrival may take place in the parents' late 40s, which makes them different to their friends and their family members and their siblings and maybe other parents at the child's school and that sort of thing. So that may be another point of difference that is actually traumatic to an adopted child. So we might also put in that growing list of adoption traumas the shame of the conception in there. So the adoptee may or may not know the story of their birth and their conception, and there is always a huge question mark next to those missing details. So the debt of gratitude is also an adoption trauma. It's a big one for adoptees. So even while they may be feeling really alone and rejected within their own family, adoptees are often repeatedly told that they should feel grateful for having a home and a family. And this expected gratitude can be a really big burden to bear day in, day out, and create a real cognitive dissonance, feeling so sad and lonely and being told that they should feel happy and grateful for their circumstances. So if a child grows up with the knowledge of the adoption, of being relinquished, the big question will always lurk as to, why didn't my mother want me? Why didn't my mother love me enough to keep me? And a conclusion that is sometimes, usually, drawn from that question may be because I'm ugly, because I'm not good enough, because I'm shameful, because I am bad. And while we as adults can easily dismantle that, for a child that can be so painful, and those negative beliefs can be so protracted and so sticky that even for the adoptees that grow up in the most attuned and the most loving of families, those beliefs can be very hard to shift. Now, none of these alone may be supremely traumatic, or they may be, but put them on top of that really severe early attachment wound from that loss of the birth mother in those first days of life, that can really amount to a severe traumatic psychological wound. And on top of this, we can load all the additional trauma that may happen in childhood. Adoptees are much more likely to be subjected to childhood sexual abuse. And I'm speculating that this may be as a result of having adopted siblings or just being vulnerable kids, but those statistics are true. So, what does all this add up to? Adoptees have a much higher likelihood of experiencing anxiety, depression, substance abuse, PTSD, CPTSD, disenfranchised grief, and are up to 4 times more likely to suicide than people who have not been adopted. Adoption trauma is real and it is prevalent within the adopted community. And it is treatable. Luckily, we have this thing called EMDR. Now, I'm only half joking here. I fully understand that other therapies can be really helpful. And it seems with adoptees, especially interestingly, group therapy can be really helpful. Maybe because it serves to alleviate the isolation and the otherness that adoptees experience. In a group of adoptees, there is one hugely binding common factor, their experience of abandonment and otherness. Now, I just want to share this really strange little story, but weirdly, when I was in my early 20s, I did a fair bit of acting, and I was in this show. It was a stage show at St Martin's in Melbourne. Some of you may know that venue. And they did a lot of youth theatre at the time. And this was a show that was directed by this really clever young fellow. And at one rehearsal, we were talking about family, and it turned out that the director was adopted. And then we kept talking, and cast member after cast member said, "Oh my God, I am too. I am too. Oh my God, I am too." And it turned out that more than half the cast was adopted. Now, it seemed that the director had chosen a cast where more than half the women had that particular trauma. He hadn't known when he'd chosen them from all the people who had auditioned for that show, but they had a shared history. Was that a coincidence, or did it represent some sort of subliminal recognition of commonality? So hard to know. It was really special, I think, for those cast members to share their stories and talk about their experience, and it was a kind of a spontaneous therapy group formation. So back to EMDR. So with EMDR therapy, we would reprocess memories that were both remembered and imagined. So the remembered memories may be those of the disclosure of being adopted, or moments of feeling or knowing that they are different to the adoptive family. And this might be quite an extensive memory network and might need a few sessions. Sorry, that's just my dog in the background. And of course, any big T traumas associated with childhood, like family violence or sexual abuse. So we might process memories that may ostensibly be happy ones, like the arrival of another sibling. It might be important to process memories of maybe meeting the birth mother, or failed attempts to connect with the birth mother, which might also represent a really huge loss. So with the implicit memories of the preverbal trauma, we can work with the felt sense of the loss, or pair that with an imagined image of the moment of abandonment. And in my experience, this has really brought substantial relief to adult adoptees. So I've spoken mainly about adoption trauma from the adoptee's point of view. Of course, there are two other very important parties in the triad of adoption. There's the adoptive parents, and then there's the relinquishing mother. And all of the three parties have their own aspects of trauma, grief, and loss, and all are relevant and all are deserving of help and resolution, as just as worthy as each other are. With adoption, there is not just one hurt or victimized party. All three of the triad can be so deeply affected by the adoption or the relinquishment. I recently attended a stage production about forced relinquishment, which was much more common in Australia in the 60s and 70s, pretty rare now. But the grief experienced by those birth mothers was enormous. And just on the subject of grief, I will mention that complex grief responds really, really well to EMDR. I did a podcast episode quite some time ago now. It's episode 13 if you want to listen back to that. It's not on YouTube, but you'll find it on my podcasts. So that kind of brings me to the end of my adoption discussion today, but just in case you're not sick of the sound of my voice by now, I will let you know that in June I am going to be doing a bit of a webinar about shame, which can be quite related. So if you're a clinician and you would like to hear about how to treat shame in clinical practice, then soon on my website I will have a link to book in for the webinar. So 4th of June, 7 p.m. Melbourne time. And then later in July I will be hosting a webinar about dissociation, and in August I'll be hosting a webinar about dissociative identity disorder with my friend and colleague Kate Beardsley-Smith, and this promises to be a really fascinating evening. I can't wait to bring you that one too. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and please feel free to reach out to me via my website emdrdoctor.com.au or via email admin@therapynest.com.au. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe and leave a comment or a request for a future episode. I would love to hear from you. So I will talk to you again next week. In the meantime, take good care. Bye for now.